Good morning. Reviewing the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis, and we are on the bottom of page 1424. 1424. Okay. Rabbi Rashab, this page, bringing together many different themes that he's been developing over the last section, we can say, explained that kol kavanose, which is b'chol koiche of Amen Yesh Shmei Rabba, means with all the intention, referring to the Ma'arich Be'echad, the extended contemplation over Achdus Hashem, finding the unity in all of existence, and a unity that goes all the way back to Atzmus, where everything is literally a seamless oneness with God Himself. He said that is also the level of Ava B'chol Moedecha. That after we talked about the Ava, the love that is commensurate to our faculties, like Al Pitam V'das, that would be a B'chol Levavcha. And even higher, the La'ava B'chol Nafshecha Seviv Kol, which is transcendence beyond our capacity, where we long to be absorbed in something greater than ourselves. Comes the third, which is B'chol Me'edecha Mamish Atzmus Ein Sof, where there's utter unity. And he explained it with the Tanya, the Koyach HaChochma Shebenefesh, that is a level that, yes, we want to be absorbed and we long to be absorbed, even though we lose our identities, but it's only a longing. It's not actually being absorbed. Chesed in Aveda is Skalus Mamish, like the spark encompassed within the source. And that's, And so there you have the highest level of B'chol Me'edach. And he compared, he said that you could understand that's the level of Rabbi Akiva. Nichnas b'shalom v'yasa b'shalom. He had a Kleis HaNefesh, Nichnas b'shalom. He entered and was elevated into that place, completely absorbed in the source. But he also had the presence, that's the Ratzei. Also, but then Yatsa b'shalom, that he brought it back down and integrated it into his life, which is the Kavanah. And when a person does that, b'chol keiche, b'chol kavanose, b'avda, b'chol meidecha, in this level of yichud, you draw down from Atzmus Ein Sof into Magdil Koyach. You're drawing down the deeper energy from Koyach Adnai, the power of God, into existence, into Koyach Maisav, into the structure where God has a structure of right and left, Yamin and Smoil, the right arm and the left arm, which is Chesed and Gvura. Each one is Yad, 14. Together, they're 28, Koyach Maisav. In that, you're infusing that with a higher 7th level of unity, not just the divine as it relates to existence, but the divine completely beyond existence and even beyond, because it is the level that connects Havai and Elikim, literally like an utter unity. And that's the level of Islan Chad, that higher than the two levels of Hu, L'Teva and Chesed, and the Hu L'Gvura, which is also transcendent level, as we discussed, Leisha Nisi, said Hu Avram, exactly as he was above, that's how he is below. But then there's a Hu that's higher, that's called the Kavem Tzoi, which reaches into the Primius HaKeser. The two levels, Chesed and Gvura, also originate in Keser, but it's Chesenius, the outer dimension of Keser. This one reaches into Primius HaKeser, where less smaller, everything is Yamin, everything is Oyer, or everything is Yamin, I should say, less smaller, and the root, that's Primius Atzmus Ein Sof, Shmoya Atzmi. And that's doing the outer dimension of Keser and the inner dimension of Keser. What is that before the Tzimtzum? So Aleis HaRotzen is like the outer dimension of Keser, where the Shemus Loshen Rabim, Shir Atzmi B'Koyach. So there is Kavim, the root at least, of structure. Okay, it's a Helam, but it's a Helam Hashayach Elagili. And Islan Chad is the Helam Ha'atzmi that's completely beyond any, you can't even call it a source of a source. It's the divine, as the divine is in its core essence. And we learned earlier, that's like the Yechel is God's capacity, And the Yechelis, everything is utterly one and seamlessly one. Hu v'shmai echad, hu v'shmai and shmai hu, like we learned earlier, completely oneness. Even higher than Yochid, he actually compared it to earlier. And that's where we stopped at the bottom of page 1424. So I'm going to continue the last line. We now is going to connect it back to something we learned back in 1411. Let me remind you what we learned. So there, he was talking about Einei Ha'eda. The Einei Ha'eda were the eyes of the nation, the eyes of the people. He said the Sanhedrin, which is the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court justices, the 70 Sanhedrin, that was a complete Sanhedrin, was 70, actually 71, as we'll discuss in a moment. But they were 70, and Moshe was the 71st. These were the Skenim in the time of Moshe, and later generations, they were called the Skenim, the Chavri Sanhedrin, the sages. Their role, Einei Ha'eda, we learned. What is Einei Ha'eda? Literally the guiding light. That's what Sanhedrin is, like a Rav. What does a Rav do? You come to him to clarify a point in halacha or give you direction in any area of life. Basically, based on Torah, it's the light that illuminates us in this world. Like we learned, the neshama itself, even though it's rooted higher than Torah, but when it comes down below, it does not have the natural instinct to know what is asur, what is mutter, what is allowed, what is not allowed, what's kosher, what's not kosher. So you look in Torah and you look at the Einei Ha'eda, the leaders, the sages, the Sanhedrin, they pass rulings and let us know the clarity. So he explained that Einei Ha'eda is 70 because it's the level of moichin as it manifests in midas. The midas are 7. So it is moichin because they're using Torah. These are people using their minds, the minds of that is studying and analyzing and applying Torah to life. But it's Torah as it applies to life, meaning to existence. It's not completely removed. That's the role of Sanhedrin, is to be engaged with people. So they're the guiding light, guided by Chabad, but Chabad shebe midas, like we learned. Since the midas are 7, 7 times 10, meaning 7 informed by all the 10 faculties, beginning from Chacham bin Das, that's 70. But then there's the Mufla shebe Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin had so-called the chief justice, the equivalent that you would have today. Who's the chief justice among the 70? So in the time of Moshe, it was Moshe Rabbeinu. So he had an elevated position higher than the Skenim. Like the Psukim tell us in Parsha Ba'alescha, when the Jews asked for meat, Moshe said, where do I have meat from? So Hashem then said, I will impart from your spirit, Moshe's spirit, upon the Skenim, and that way the Skenim then received from the spirit of Moshe. So you see from that Moshe is like higher than Atzilus, and from Moshe was Nimshach into the Skenim. Moshe, as he explained earlier, I'm going back to page 1411, explained is the level either Atzmus of Chachma, whereas the Skenim is the Chesenius of Chachma as it's mashpia and transmits into Midas. Then he said it's Chachmas Timah of Arich, and even higher Chachmas Timah of Atik. He spoke all these levels on Moshe Rabbeinu. So what is that in our context? So he explained that is the difference between Ish and Einai is Moshe, the pupil of the eye, is where the neshamas are rooted higher than the regular Torah as it's transmitted through Einei Ha'eda, the eyes of the people, the Sanhedrin, and that's the level of Moshe. Then he connected it to yet another topic, the concept of Hu Ubez Dinei. On page 1412, he brought from Chazal, it talks about who Hashem is who, and Bez Dinei, his court of law. I'm sorry, that was page 1410, what I was speaking about. On 1411, he connects it to Sanhedrin Mufla is like who Ubez Dinei. So Bez Dinei is what? Is the 70 sages of Sanhedrin. And their root is Chesenius of Chacham and Bina. And who? That's connected, the Mufla Sheba Sanhedrin, like Moshe, the higher level of what he calls, let's say, here he says that's them that connects to the Midas. And he says, what level is that? Ishin Einai. Yeah. Like the level of Atik, a deeper, higher level. And Naveda, that who is accessed through the Aveda Shalamayla Metam Vadas B'chol Nafshecha. But now we're learning that these are in a higher level of who Tov Mikulam, that he's better than all of them. That's the who of Atzmus. So who itself has two levels. There's Ato would be Mamala Kalalman. That's the divine as it relates to existence, like the Sanhedrin. Eineha Eda, the eyes that guide. Then there's who, that's the who, that's Helam. That's like Seviv Kalalman, it's concealed, but it's still commensurate to existence. Sehelam Shaykh Al-Agili, like he said here, like we learned. So it is a level of who, but it's still not complete who. But then there's the who of Atzmus, even higher than Seviv Kalalman, and that is the Aveda B'chol Ma'idecha. The who is the Aveda B'chol Nafshecha, that's what he said there. And the who that we're talking about, Tov Mikulon, is higher than the who of L'Teva, L'Rav, Chesed, and Gvura. It's higher than all Kavim. That's the who connected to Helema Atzmi of Ein Sof, that's higher than any structure. And that's the Aveda of Ava B'chol Ma'idecha. So this now is going to go back to the who of Bezdinei. So I'm reading the last line on page 1424. And the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. And he says like this: V'zeu b'chinas hu shalamayla mayla b'chinas bezdin. This is the level of who. This level of Helema Atzmi, what he called. Islan Chad. Tov Mekulan, Havayu Alekenu, Havaya Alekenu, as he said earlier. Havaya Alekenu, the pasuk was, let's see here. Havaya Alekenu b'chol aris mishpatav shemidus rachamim la'elam. That is who, that's much higher than Bezdin. Uke'inyan hamufla shebesanhedrin. Like I just summed up, top of page 1425, the mufla shebesanhedrin, the one that, the mufla means of the Sanhedrin itself, it evokes one mufla, like from the word pella. He's removed, he's exalted, he's higher. It's a flaw, a wonder that's beyond and separate from the Sanhedrin itself, like we just discussed. The midas racham of la'elam, that's the expression from the Medrash. It refers to the be'er pnei melech b'chinas pnimius ve'atzmus ein sof hu rak b'chinas chayim. So now it's midas racham of la'elam, that everything is rachamim, even the gvura is transformed to compassion, like we learned. Bitl gzar, that's mavatal the gzar din. When you say amin yesh me'raba b'chol keiche b'chol kavanose, it reaches all the way where into pnei melech b'chinas pnimius ve'atzmus ein sof. There, everything is just the level of chayim. Umesham nimshach liyas gam midas hadim nepach lechesed l'rachamim. And from there we have the power, we draw from there that also the midas hadin, the gvura, the gzar din should also be transformed to love and compassion, as we learned earlier. So that ties together now one more piece about who and bezdinei and amufla shebesanhedrin. Any questions before I continue? So now, the Rebbe Rashab will tie it together back to the essential theme that the whole topic began with. And what was that? That Neshamas Yisrael are the ones that achieve all this. But they're avodah lamata. So even though the eye, as it is below, cannot see in the dark, it needs to have an outside light. The neshamas, when they come down below, they need the outside light of the Einei Ha'eda that we just discussed, and of Teira Eir that illuminates them. But with that power, the neshamas achieve something that Teira itself cannot achieve, because it's the neshamas that achieve this. And what do they achieve? They are able to draw down. Who says Amen Yehesh Me'raba B'chol Koichei? It's a neshama down the beguf. It's Dafka Yid when he says Amen Yesh Me'raba. Who's Ma'arich Be'echad? Who contemplates this extended contemplation of Echad is when you say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So now he's going to tie it together and says the neshamas Yisrael is the souls of Israel. Bekeichem lahamshich madeigazu. They have the power to draw down this level from Atzmus Ein Sof with the siyua, with the support and the help, of course, of Teira Eir, but they have the power to access it. Why? Because that's where they're rooted. Mishum debamiti sharsham, because in their root, in their true root, not as they come down through Ishtalshlus, because the neshamas are also rooted in Ata Barasa, Ata Yitzarta, Ata Nefachtabi, but it's rooted, as we learned, Tahirihi, all the way before the Tzimtzum, and before that, all the way in the Helama Atzmi, of Shemaya Atzmi, that's higher than all these levels. They're rooted in the core Ein Sof, the Helama Atzmi, that's higher than the Giluyim, even of Chesed and Gvura, even of Havaya and Elikim, which is already two kavim, or two potential capacity to reveal or to conceal. They're rooted in the highest level. As we learned earlier on page 1405 and on, the Neshamas Yisrael that the souls of Israel are higher even the Chachma as it is in its root. Because they're rooted in Atzmus Mamish. And because they're rooted there, so even though that root is concealed and it's Teira Eir and Ein Ha'eda, that so-called is the catalyst that enlightens and empowers the neshama to achieve what it has to achieve, but it's accessing now. It's like when you go and you meet somebody who you don't yet see their potential, and you see and you inspire them. Once you inspire them, it's the neshama itself that is now accessing its powers. It's not your inspiration that did it. Your inspiration, so-called, lit the flame and ignited them. That's why they can draw down from Atzmus Ein Sof through their Avodah in Achdus Hashem, in unifying Echad, Hashem Echad, and the highest level of love that we just discussed, which is this highest level of Yichud that goes all the way into the Etzem. And that's why the neshamas are called, as we learned back when he started the whole topic, on page 1408, he said, Yisevavenu, Yitzarnehu, Ki'ishin Einai, they are like the pupil of God's eye. Why? Because that pupil, that's referring to this highest level. Bechinas Ayin Hashem El Yereyav, like he explained on the next page, at the bottom of 1409 and 1410. That the eye of God is directed specifically al Yereyav to those that revere Him. So we're talking Dafka Neshamas Yisrael now. Like he explained there, you also say the Malachim are supervisors, and they also watch the Hashgacha. But he's called the Chetzenius Hashgacha of existence. And now we're talking about a level that is far higher than that. We're talking about a level that is the Neshamas that's even higher. So if you go back to page 1409 and 1410, he explained the difference between the Hashgacha of the Malachim, which is more Chetzenius, Shluchei Shefa, they're the messengers of the flow, and Neshamas Hashgacha from Shem Havaya, which is Pnimius of Neshamas Ishin Einai, which is a lot higher. Avedasam, that through their Aveda, because they're rooted in this highest level, Yichud, in the Saved of Yichud, that they're unifying existence with God. So they're not just unifying Him on a lower level, they're unifying it all the way to the highest level. Shemiyachdim hakol b'b'chinas Atzmus yizbarach b'b'chinas Yachid mamish kanal. So you could unite God and say, okay, everything in existence is rooted in God's speech, or even in God's thought. But who says you're connecting it all the way to the highest levels in Atzmus? And here he says, because the neshamas are rooted there, they have the power to be miyachid everything in Atzmus chinis yachid mamish with a seamless unity. It's not even leaving room. It's not even shmoi. It's even higher than shmoi. Well, I should say it's shmoi hakol b'atzmusei. Higher than shmoi as an actual name and expression. It's the capacity to express in Atzmus the Achelis, and with a love of the highest level, with everything that they have, outside of all parameters, that reaches into Atzmus Ein Sof higher than B'chol Levavcha and higher than B'chol Nafshecha. Sha'idei zeh hem ishin einay kavyachol. Through this avodah, that's what defines them, and that's why they're, so to speak, his pupil, because they reach and they were able to draw that down. Umamshichim gam b'seder ishtalshlis, and they draw down also into seder ishtalshlis, this higher level of unity. B'chinas ayin Hashem, the less smoila b'hayatika. They draw down this level of ayin Hashem, the core eye of God. The less smoila b'hayatika, where there's no smoil, there's no gvura in hayatika, in the level of atik, this highest level. Shagam midas hadin, that even something that is a midas hadin, that from a lower level's perspective would be judgment or din, simsum helam, nepach lemidas harachamim, is transformed b'chinas midas racham of le'elam. Who tov achad, who is tov mekulan, that b'chinas midas racham of le'elam, like the Medrash says, that his midas racham is forever, the eternal compassion. Le'elam here also meaning there's no room for anything else but God's compassion. And that is this highest level of unity that he discussed back, as I said. So this ties together the pages all the way starting from page 1405. We started talking about neshamis in general. The truth is, even started earlier in 1403. But 1402, I'm just looking back. Yeah. And this also, you see the connection to Riyah, Eir HaRiyah. Remember the two levels of how the eye sees in this vessel, in the container. There's the Koyach HaRiyah in the eye and in the eye. But there's limitations. It can't see in the dark on its own. It needs something to a siyua to spark it. But then it accesses the Koyach HaRiyah, be'etzem Koyach HaRiyah, be'etzem HaNefesh. That's how the neshamas are rooted all the way in the highest level. And then ve'neinu me'iris k'shemesh kireach, which we'll discuss later when we get back to that. That's the level that will be la'asad lave, that the eye itself will see, will not need to have the siyua, because the eye will have access, the neshamas will have access, their root and source, which is higher and actually mashpia into Torah. He doesn't mention the hashpah into Torah right here, but he said that earlier when he's discussed this topic. So we see here, this last section, he ties together essentially the last 15 pages, probably a little more even, the last 15 pages, that he connects it all to the neshamas that have this power. But remember, there's the other side of things that the neshamas need siyua from Torah Eir, and also from the malachim, Einei Ha'eda, and also from the malachim, which we're going to discuss now more at length, because you need to constantly balance the two, because the neshamas cannot do this on their own. The neshamas on this earth without Torah, Ner Mitzvah and Torah Eir, and without the siyua of the Einei Ha'eda and the malachim, which precedes Shema, Birchas Yetzer, as we shall learn, the neshamas remain, that power remains dormant or remains concealed and needs to be ignited, so to speak. It needs to be brought alive or fanned, if you wish. Okay, with that, we conclude the paragraph on page 1425. Any questions?
So that means that the neshama is coming from Helem Ha'atzmi or Atzmus, which is higher than Helem Ha'atzmi.
He never said Atzmus higher than Helem Ha'atzmi. He says Helem Ha'atzmi, and that's that. I never saw more than that.
No, just now you said a few times, mentioned the word Atzmus, from Atzmus.
Are you looking inside the Sefer?
No, I don't have a Sefer in front of me. But
the words are Mushrashim ba'atzmus ein sof b'bchinas Helem Ha'atzmi. That's how the Rebbe Rasha puts it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Are there any questions? Any other questions? Okay. So now we continue on. We're now going to go to the other side of things. We're going to talk about how neshama reaches this highest level. It doesn't begin that way. This is only, we talked now, the ultimate experience. B'chol meidecha, the yichud of Hashem echad and everything. But for an neshama to get there requires a lot of work. And that's why, as we're going to learn, the Shema, we don't begin with Shema. Before Shema, there's Birchis Yetzer, which talks about the Malachim, the angels, which empower us in addition to the power of Torah. Also, the Malachim empower us, and that's why they're the Einei, they're also called Einei Hashem. They empower us to achieve this level. So that's what he's going to discuss now for a good long section. And he's also going to talk about how deep our Avodah reaches. Because remember, on one hand, when you talk about Atzmus, Ani Hashem Leishanisi, we said who means Leishanisi, Nitzchi. That was the whole point he discussed earlier when we started with the Medrash. He said exactly those words. He said that, reading the words here, that Rachamim le'elam, Lashon Aflein Lotev le'mutav, and b'chinas bli shinui klal, u'lamayim b'chinas leishanisi. There's no shinui at all. So Atzmus is beyond everything. And yet we learned that because of the Chafetz Chesed, that the Eibishter wants Chesed, that caused them to want to engage with us, and therefore, yes, and have a relationship with us. So basically, he wants to need us. He doesn't need us, but he wants it. And as such, comes from Chafetz Chesed, as we learned at length also in volume 2. So we're also going to discuss that where Avodah is rooted, what levels it impacts. So basically, just keep in mind the following, that a neshama begins in its highest levels, but it travels through the whole cosmic order to come down into this world. And then once it's in this world, it needs to go b'seder v'adroga. It has to go in an orderly fashion. For Avodah to mean anything, it can't be with a leap, and it can't be miracles, and it can't be magic. It has to be that we integrate it. Like I always talk about mutfa, murgish, muskel. Ben chamish lemikra, ben eser lemishna. B'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha. And even Shema, we don't start davening with Shema. We start first talking about the Brichas HaShachar, Psukei de Zimra, and Brichas Yetzer till we get to Shema. So you see, the neshamas go through levels. So the truth is, what we really want is to bring the highest levels of Yichud to permeate Seder Ishtalshlus all the way to the lowest levels. Adira betachtenim. Adira lo yizbarach, adira for Atzmus, a home for Atzmus, but where? In the lowest of levels. So the neshama has to have both sides. Its ability to reach Atzmus because it's rooted there. But it also has to go through a process of education and training, and like we learned, and the siyua, like the eye that needs a light to guide us. Like I've explained many times at length, why we need Talmud, Godel Shemevil de Maisa, because without Talmud, we don't know how to act. So who teaches us? It's our educators. It's our parents. It's Einei Ha'eda. It's the teachers that teach us Torah, that illuminates the path. And in the process, as it illuminates us, it elevates us and allows us to access the root source of where we originate from. But you can see that that's a long process that needs to be constantly balanced, because there's the two sides to the picture here. And that's a big part of what we're going to be learning now, the second half of it, which is how you actually actualize it when we're not on that level. And a neshama down on earth can't just jump to B'chol Meidecha and the Yichud with Atzmus. It's nice to read about it, but how do we actually go there? So therefore we need to go step by step, and with the support that we get from our education and from the eyes, the guiding light of our leaders, based on the guiding light of Torah. And now, in addition, we also have the guiding light and the support and help from the Malachim, that, as we're going to learn. So the next section, I'll just give you the lay of the land. We'll talk about the Malachim and their role. Then he's going to talk about where Avodah reaches, basically starting on page 1428. Then he's going to continue talking about that for a while. And finally, let's see here. And then on page 1434, he's going to go back to explain how the Neshamas Yisrael are higher than Malachim. And yet, at the same time, you need the support of the Malachim. Talk about Moshe, Yeshua, let me see. Yeah. Got length about Krishma again. Shman Yisrael Neshamis. And now the difference between the Neshamis in time of Golus and time of when it's not Gol, time of Geula. And then finally, when does he go back to Einayim on page 1454? So now we're on 1425, 20 more pages, 30 more pages, I should say. He's going to go back to Riyas Ha'ayin, how Neshama has both aspects of just like a physical eye, needs outside light to see in the dark, but then the eye itself, as it develops and matures, becomes an eye that sees, as will be La'asad Lave. And then, let's see here, on page 1463, he will return to the Maimon HaMagbil Sheves, Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, Ner Mitzvah V'Torah, and that will take us all the way till the end of the Hemshech. Like we said, does not conclude, but it's all being informed by the Maimorim we learned and what we learned here. So obviously I'll bring it all tied all together. I actually just submitted my first section. As I said, I'm writing it all down so I could share with you what I wrote. The first section has been finished. I just submitted it to be published here in one of the journals. Yeah. Okay. So unless there's some questions, I'm going to start the next section here. Does anybody have anything they want to ask? Okay. Now, Vihine. So it's the new paragraph on page 1425. Vihine. And now, Hagam Shen is boyer. Even though he explained earlier, page 1408 to 1410, the Yisrael and Pchinas Ishen Einai, that Yisrael, the souls of Israel, are the level of the pupil of God's eye, not just his eye, but the pupil of the eye. Shalamayla harbe memalochim, shenikroim Einei Hashem. That's far higher than the level of angels that are called the eyes of God, like we learned there, the 7 eyes, if you recall. Nevertheless, yesh ma'ila, gamkim b'malachim, there's a quality and a virtue that the malachim have, v'neshamis Yisrael mekablim mehem, and the souls of Israel receive from them. So here you see both sides. On one hand, the neshamis are higher, but there's a quality that the malachim have that we receive from them. And that's what he's going to explain now. What the malachim do to help us in our avodah, which of course is very fundamental in explaining in general what's the role of malachim. Like when we say Shalom Aleichem every Friday night. Why do we need malachim? So generally we talk about they're protective. They're our guardian angels, so to speak. They protect us. They escort us. Shalom Aleichem, and all the different expressions, and then Seischem L'Sham. Like we find by Yaakov Avinu, that there were the malachim that escorted him to Israel, from Israel to Charan, and then there's the malachim that escorted him from Charan to Israel, and that's the malachim that went up and down on the ladder. So that but on a deeper level, what does it mean? Protect. What it means it protects us. It's not just protecting us from danger or harm. Malachim actually are God's messengers, part of Seder Shtalshus, that God sends malachim in order to help us in our avodah, which will answer the big question: why do we talk about malachim altogether in davening? Neshamas are far higher than malachim. So why do we talk in Birchas Yetzer? We talk about the Yetzer Misharsav. You talk about the Serafim, Chayes HaKedesh, Efani HaKedesh, and they say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Why do we mention all that? And the answer briefly is because the malachim help ignite. Excuse me. are like part of the siyua that help us in our avodah. So he says, by inyan hu. This is the inyan now. Now you may recall we learned this already, so I'm not going to go through all the details as we learned it the first time, just that which is relevant to our conversation here, to our discussion. The inexiv, it says in the pasuk, Ben Yaakov Ephraim, my child, my son, that was precious to me. Al Kain, Hamu Mei Loy Rachim. So Hamu Mei is talking about, if you recall, the intestines, referring to the malachim, like he says in a moment, that God bestows. So the question is, what is this referring to? If Ephraim is referring to the Shamas Yisrael, what's this hamulay? Hamumeyalay meyalay rachim. So he says meyai, which is literally means like the stomach or the insides. I think we gave it some names when we learned it the first time. I'm trying to recall the intestines. What was the exact expression? How it was translated? The b'nei ma'ayim, which is the digestive system. So meyai koi ala malachim shenikroim meyai v'kirbi. This referring to the angels that are called the innards. Meyai v'kirbi, the stomach, or the, what's another name for stomach? I remember we came up with a good word. Forgot what it was. Kirbi is what? The innards, like the intestines, the kishkas. U'kamashikosav v'chol kirbi Hashem kodshe. The isa chol kirbi Hashem kodshe, and all those innards that sanctify His holy name. So it says in the Zohar, "V'isa b'Zohar lech lecha daf bezayin ol man korvei v'chol kirbei." What is that kirbei? He says, "Ilin shar chayun bara de ikron kervayim." These are the other chayun. These chayun is like chayas, the chayas hakodesh, the malachim that He created that are called kerbayim. They're called the innards. Kumay da amrinan. Like the pasuk says, Hamu meyai. So you see clearly that this pasuk is referring to two things: Ephraim, who's precious by me, God says, and Hamu meyai Rachim is talking about the angels that serve as the processors, as we're going to learn, of the food. So just like when you're eating food, before you digest, before you're able to turn it into nutrients that become internalized and digested within the human being, the malachim serve that role where they process the hamshachas in order for Ephraim to be able to internalize it. That's what he's going to explain now. I remember we worked through
enzymes.
What did you say?
Enzymes.
Enzymes?
Uh-huh.
Enzymes are the chemicals that the digestive system exudes in order to digest. But that's not, I don't think this is the definition of enzymes. It's the process. The enzymes is part of the process. Just 1 second, please. I'm looking, I think. Just give me a moment. I want to look something up. Okay. So let me explain it this way. Good. He's going to explain it later a bit more, but let me just start and just lay it out right here. Remember, we've been talking many times, from my flesh I behold God. So the way our very system is structured reflects how the divine cosmic order works. And we've seen that play that itself out many places. We've just been discussing speech, thought, the faculties, etzem nefesh. So the issue of how we consume food, which in turn becomes the source of our sustenance, God could have made it that you should just be able, like an amoeba, you don't have to eat food. You could just breathe, and that sustains you. Why is this whole process of taking food, preparing food, making sure it's healthy food, then you put it in your mouth, and first you break it down with your teeth, then it goes through a whole digestive process, through the gullet, all the way into the system, and as you said, enzymes and everything else that the body releases in order to separate the nutrients from the waste, expelling the waste, processing the nutrients until it becomes damo basar k'psarei, our flesh and blood that sustains us. So now Rizal explains that with a different question. He says, why the human being was a min ha'adam, the medaber, is higher than chai and semeach and daimon. So why is it that the higher species is dependent on chai, semeach, and daimon for its sustenance? So he answers, because those foods come from a higher root. They come from Tehu. And the Avodas HaAdam is reflected in the way we consume food. That we come into this world, and our job is to take the raw materials of existence that are rooted in Tehu in a very high level, but they're not tamed yet. They haven't been harnessed. Think of like the animal soul. The animal soul on its own is driven by its own self-interest. It has tremendous potent power. But you need the divine soul to come to take the raw materials, break it down, absorb its nutrients, the sparks within those foods, and use that energy to transform the world while also eliminating any waste. So essentially, eating a meal basically represents the Avedus HaBirurim, that we are always busy. Birurim means to separate between the dross and the shaf, between the good, the nutrients, and the waste, and to draw out the positive energy as the digestive system that it ultimately becomes our blood and part of who we are. So, understanding that, therefore, how do we achieve that? Like I said, the neshama on its own in heaven is not mevar berurim. There's no berurim there. Berurim are only in this world. In heaven, the neshama is sitting and learning Torah and loving and revering God. That's all the neshama does. Nana meziva shechina. When it comes into this material world, where the power of the neshama is concealed in the body and the animal soul, the neshama has to go through a whole processing. So we're learning, this pasuk is teaching us that Aben Yaakov li Ephraim, Hashem says, this child of mine is very precious to me, the neshama. But because of Rachamim, because my compassion to help the neshama do its work, I give it a digestive system, processors. And that's the role of the malachim, that they will help the neshamas process their avodah of taking the material world and turning it into spiritual energy, spiritualizing matter, basically. That's what he's really saying here, as we'll discuss and we'll learn inside. So that's what the pasuk comes to tell us. So the first thing the Rebbe Rashab establishes, that what's hamu me'ai loy rachim, rachim arachmenu, as the pasuk says, is the system, this digestive system, the processing of that allows us to digest and absorb the nutrients of the food. As the Zayah says, "Man krovai ilin sharchiyun bara dikrum krovayim homomeo upirish apardis," and the pardis b'shar kinuyim. That's the pardis of the Ramak. Ramesha Korvirus erech krovayim. Krovayim are those innards, those intestines. The koi al chayes hakodesh. That they refer to the chayes hakodesh. Like I said, the malachim that are called the holy energies. The koron chayun bara mepnei shein chutz la'atzilus. Why is it called He created them? Because we're talking about a level that's outside of Atzilus. Because in Atzilus, everything is holy. You don't need a processing. The processing is only outside of Atzilus. I'm not going to read this parentheses because it's not so directly relevant. But basically, in the parentheses, he just talks about that there's a higher level of Chayin and a lower level of Chayin.
It's all about culture.
I'm middle of speaking. I'm middle of teaching. So let me finish, and then we'll take any questions and comments. Okay. So there's Chayin Eloin, Chayin Tatoin. That's what he talks about in the parentheses. As I said, I'm going to skip that. If you want to understand those details, I would refer you back to when I taught this class a few years ago. 1 second. Yeah, that's the Midas of Atzilus. Yeah, and the Chayin Taton is the krema, the membrane, the diaphragm, as he calls it, the posik, the banash, the einachotz, the kovid, the mafs. Okay. The parentheses is important, but I'm going to skip the parentheses because it's not directly relevant to the bigger theme. But it goes in more detail to explain this level of the intestines, that are the mayim, the karbayim, that is the processing, like the diaphragm that he says, that separates between the lungs and the intestines. So basically, the malachim's role is to serve as processors to help the distribution of the food to turn into nutrients. That's the physical example. And the ruchnius is the avodah sabrurim, like we spoke. And after the parentheses, he concludes the pardes on the crime karbayim. Why they call karbayim, karbayim, which also comes from the word kiruv, al shem krevis latzilus. Because they're close to Atzilus. They're outside of Atzilus, but they're close to Atzilus. V'yashleimer da kavon al elam habriya. Rebbe Rashab says the kavon is on the world of Bria. That's where the malachim reside. Shemisar chesdes mekol mokim imelam Atzilus. So even though it's already outside of Atzilus, but nevertheless it unites it with Atzilus, because that's where the malachim serve as another interface between Atzilus and Bria. Shara ba'elam habriya mer b'chinas Hashem havaya d'shem havaya shemesachedes im hayud b'chinas trein rein.
What's train ran? Please remind me.
Two friends. But I'm skipping here. I'm not going through all the language here because, like I said, I'm only going to quote here what's relevant to our bigger discussion because it's just going to be too distracting and too much. I've already taught it back then, so this is one of the sections I'm just going to skip and just address a few things here. Okay. Nevertheless, Bria, even though it is connected to Atzilus, but it's still outside of Atzilus, like the digestive system that's outside of the higher organs in the body. So what radiates in Bria is primarily bina, not chachma, that radiates not silas. Rak shebehelim yesh b'bchinas hachachma bebina. Except concealed, it has the level of chachma and bina. So malachim use that, but they're to help the refinement and this distribution that we're talking about and processing. But it's primarily bina of bria.
When can you take questions?
I'll let you know. I won't forget.
Okay.
But okay. So now the next section, he's going to go over what I just said, and we'll read that. Yeah, the details. He's going to break down the details of this whole process. But as I said, I'm going to skip here sections because it's going to be very bogged us down, in my opinion. And being that this is the second time we're learning it, I'm relying that you can go back and hear the classes that I recorded already first time around. And I'm not going to do that now. And I'll just focus on the main theme, which is that the malachim are siyua. They are a support and help us in the process of neshamas refining this world. So they are similar to the intestines, whose job is to help process and distribute the food and turn it into nutrients that help sustain the human being. And we'll soon learn how this is all naveda. He's going to explain that in the next section. But you're going to see me skipping a few lines here and there because I don't want to go into the whole Kabbalistic side of it. I want to stick to the main theme. And that way we'll ultimately manage to finish the Shemshech, even though we're our second time around. But as I said, I'll do it more in a condensed fashion. So being it's ready, what time? Okay, so I'm going to stop here, the class altogether, and I'll be happy to take questions.
I thought there were one or two people ahead of me. Meira or Elisheva, did anybody want to go ahead of me?
It's about bioculture that everybody right now is crazy about. The bacteria, the good bacteria, bugs who digest all the food and how they help to digest everything we consume. A lot of them, a lot of
Are you asking something, or you're just making a statement?
You ask about what type of curry
I only was wondering what word to use for Me'ai and Karvai. That's all I was asking. I wasn't. The concept is clear. The intestines and the innards of our being process food. They digest food. They separate between nutrients and the waste. That's the main theme here. I was just looking for the right word to use as far as, but I'm fine with the word intestines or processing, or we'll see. I remember a few words I came up with last time when we learned it. I don't remember them all right now. We'll
I can't remember them either. But I was checking the nigla on the phrase, and they keep referring Hemumea as my heart, and so
no, it's not heart. Me'ai is not heart. Me'ai is stomach, but that's yeah.
I'm just saying what anyways.
Yeah, but I'm talking about what he's talking about here.
Yeah, of course.
He's talking about the intestines and the digestive organs.
I know. I understand. I'm trying to understand why the shot would be the heart. But anyways, the question I wanted to ask is, well, twofold. I understand that malachim are helping us accomplish birurim, but the question is how. That's one, and two. I thought
we just began learning it. He's going to explain it.
Okay, so I don't want to jump the gun, but I thought the ikar with malachim was bittul. That the whole point.
Okay, but you're premature. You're just beginning to discuss it. So let's see how he's going to explain it. We'll see what they teach.
Okay, fair enough. Sorry, I do have a tendency to jump the gun. Sorry.
Yeah, gut. I think I was looking for the word the guts.
Yeah, the intestines, guts in medical terminology are the intestines.
Right. But I think that was the word that I was using last time.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
How would you define the word
hamu? Any other
hamu?
questions?
I didn't have a question before, but I'm just wondering how would you define the word hamu?
Hamu me'ai?
Yeah.
I think, how do we translate Hamu? May I? I think he established, maybe established.
It sounds to me, just from the language, that it's like overwhelmed, like whelmed, like rising up and engulfing me with feeling.
Yeah, but here he's talking about a specific thing here. The pasuk is, I think, in Yirmiyahu Lamed Aleph Yutes. I'm just seeing how they translated there. Here
That's what they say heart. At least that's what I saw.
Hamu
yeah,
is
but
like an
it's not just
action.
here's stomach. That's Lamed Aleph Yutes. But
I know. I'm saying in Yirmiyahu, that was the translation. I'm pretty sure.
It's also interesting that we're mentioning Ephraim where he's showing up in the Parsha.
It says, Ben Yakir Ephraim im Yeled Shashim Kimi de Dabri Bo Zachar Eskarena Od Al Ken Hemu Me'ai Lo Racham Arachamenu Num Hashem. And then it says, that is why my heart yearns for him. I will receive him back in love, declares God.
Okay, but this is not, we're not learning Pshat here. This is a Zohar. This is the deeper meaning of the pasuk. May I referring to the intestines, and Hamu may I think Hamu means established. He established or he shaped or crafted. I think that's the meaning here.
Not the heart, may I.
What?
Even homo may I. It's not the heart. It is the stomach.
Yeah, but what's the word Hamu mean? I think established, I think is the right.
You're so overwhelmed with yearning. So this is the expression is that my intestines are yearning, overwhelming yearning.
Yeah, that's correct. Now I recall. Correct. Not established. I'm sorry. Correct. But if he's gonna explain it in detail. He's gonna explain it soon. So we'll learn it. We'll see it inside. He's gonna explain it.
Is there another place where Hamu shows up or Hamu Mea? It's a common phrase.
Shows up a few other times.
It.
It shows up a few other times, but they in Pshat in Nigla, but they translate it the same way each time. That's why I'm confused too.
There's nothing to be confused. In Hebrew, words have many different meanings. Just because someone translates heart doesn't mean that's a translation. There's other translations. If you look in the commentaries, you'll see many different translations for it. It's a common thing. You have a word that can be translated many different ways.
Yeah.
Here he says, he's clearly, he just brought a Zohar that says clearly, it's talking about the Krevayim, Me'er v'Kirvi, and he's talking about, but the word yearning, correct. It's like the yearning for I think he's going to explain, because I remember we discussed this last time when we learned it as well.
Could a translation be plumb wrong? Like,
depends. You have to look at if it's a reliable translator or it's not a reliable translator. Anyway, let me stop here. I'm going to stop the recording here, closer to the bottom of page 1424. 1425, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop it.